Hello and welcome to today's episode of A Slice of Medieval, and today we're going rogue and all the way back to Roman Britain with the only writer I know of whose name is longer than mine, Simon James Atkinson Turney. A fellow Yorkshireman, Simon has written of the Templars, the Vikings, but the place he appears to be most at home is with the Romans. The author of the Marius Mules books, his Damned Emperors series is excellent, and as is The Gods of War, which he co-wrote with Gordon Doherty. Today, we're going to talk about his latest tome, which is Agricola, or we'll discuss that in a minute, Invader. Welcome, Simon.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us. It's lovely to have you on. And I'm going straight into the first question, because I was saying Agricola, and Derek was saying Agricola, and I still don't know. So what is it? How do you say his name?
Right. Well, in Latin it would be Agricola. So Agricola is probably the closest anglicised version. You'd be surprised how many people call him Agricola, though. A friend of mine in York has a superb little anecdote about a psychic. Of a fairly infamous psychic calling him Agricola. But yeah, my granddad used to when I was a kid, his joke was that Agricola was the first cousin of Coca-Cola. Which, yeah, shows to show you how long ago I've been studying the guy and how long ago that question's been cropping up.
It rolls off the tongue better for Yorkshire people, I think, as Agricola rather than Agricola.
Maybe.
So you, as Sharon said, you've written about so many different things, but you keep coming back to Roman. So what is the attraction? I mean, it's where you started, I suppose, but what's the attraction for you of Roman history?
I'm a Romanophile, and have been since I was about 6. Essentially, when I was, I think it was 6 years old, I was taken up to Hadrian's Wall by my granddad. And it was like a February, blowing a gale and snow, and I stood on Housestead's fort on the ridge,
Yeah.
and in the snow, I thought, oh, this is what I want to learn. This is what I want to do. And actually, what I wanted to be was a Roman. I put it down on when I was at school, and what do you want to be? Roman. But the fates are against me there until time travel appears. But yeah, so it's been a lifelong thing, really. I love all history. Being a North Yorkshireman, I'm surrounded by castles and abbeys, and I spent a lot of my youth traipsing around immense medieval reminders as well. And I love the era. I love a growing love of the early medieval era as well. Yeah. But I think if you're into your history, specialisms are natural because there's just so much to learn that you can't focus on too many eras and expect to know enough to make writing a book worthwhile. I've looked at writing in various eras and decided in the end that there's just no hope of me learning enough to be confident in writing a book. Rome, on the other hand, I have been studying for 40 years, and while there are people out there who are considerably more knowledgeable than me, I'd like to say, consider myself at least part way up the scale. And I think the other attraction of Rome is that until early modern history, I don't think there's an era we have more information on. The ancient Egyptians left plenty of records and plenty of architecture and art, but Rome left more. Ancient Greece has left us immense amounts but Rome has left more in terms of writings of plays and histories, of philosophy, and just of letters and everyday accounts. And I can't think of another era again until the early modern, when you've got letters written from one ordinary person to another that have survived and give us a view of the everyday life of the Romans. You know, Cicero complaining about the bathhouse across the road and the noise it makes, and you know, day and night, or the lady on Hadrian's Wall inviting a friend at a different fort to a birthday party, the soldier asking for socks. It's it's an immense subject, which I would say that even within Rome you have to specialize, because there's so much information and no one is ever going to know everything about Rome, although certain people seem to be intent on trying. So yeah, that's why Rome.
Yeah.
That's for me.
Headstones, you know, there's more headstones for Romans than there are for medieval people.
Yes.
I was in the Ashmolean on Saturday, just walking down a couple of hours, and it's like, and I was thinking of you, Simon, because I'm looking at all these Roman headstones and things and thinking, you know.
I don't know whether to be flattered or offended when you look at Roman headstones and think of me.
Yeah, dead Romans, and she thought of you straight away.
I've killed a few mine in my books. It has been said, so.
Well, I was reading Agricola at the time as well, so that's probably why I thought of you rather than Ben Kane or somebody.
Yeah.
So that's what attracts you to Rome. But what attracts you to Agricola's story in particular? Because you've already written a biography of him, and now we're on to a novel, or several novels.
Yes. Well, I think the novelization thing was a natural progression. When I'd written the biography, the non-fiction biography, the first thing I did when I wrote the end was look at it and think, my God, but that would make an excellent trilogy of novels. And immediately mooted it around publishers that I was already working with. And yeah, they leapt at it. I think because he's a fascinating subject in himself. There is no character in Roman history, I think, who has such, apart from emperors, we'll not count emperors in this, no non-imperial Roman who has such a thoroughly described life, courtesy of his son-in-law, Cornelius Tacitus, who wrote his biography stroke eulogy stroke general complaint about the state of Roman politics. But yeah, his Agricola, while some people are very scathing of its accuracy, some people consider it more a political statement. There are signs that parts of it were lifted wholesale from Caesar's writings and rearranged, which, I mean, plagiarism has been rife for thousands of years, obviously.
Yeah.
But my point that I made in numerous times, probably repeatedly in my non-fiction biography, is that when Tacitus's Agricola was released, people who were reading it included people who would have been in it, who would have been in those campaigns. So while he may have played with the truth and stretched points here and there, I don't think he could have been outright lying at any given point, because he would have been hauled up on it.
Yeah.
Officers who had been on these campaigns will have been there in court while it was released. So I think you've got a certain, you've got to admit a certain accuracy to it, which means that we have the life story of a general in the 1st century. And not only that, he is unusual in that a Roman climbing the Cursus Honorum would have various political and military posts in his time. Certainly his first post is a military tribune in a legion somewhere, and then later on he would command a legion himself, and then the ultimate goal provincially is a governorship. Agricola is the only person I know of who served all 3 of those in the same province. So he was in Britain as a tribune, then in Britain commanding the 20th Legion, then in Britain as the governor conquering the north of England and Scotland. And that alone makes him unique and of incredible importance to anyone in Britain. Particularly for those of us who live in the north of England and Scotland, which are, you know, very much his territory. I mean, I did a tour when I was writing the biography. I did a tour up around Scotland, and there are only 3 real campaigns ever in Roman campaigns up in that direction of Scotland. You've got Agricola's campaign in the 70s and 80s. You've got Septimius Severus in 208, and then you've got Constantius, Constantine's father, crossing the wall later on, although he probably only stayed in the south of Scotland. So, you know, when you're wandering around all these sort of sites up in the north of Scotland, well, you know, right the way up to the Moray Firth, you know that only twice have the Romans ever been up that far, and Agricola was one of them. And he is the one who broke the back of the Scots, broke the back of the Caledonia, and actually conquered Scotland. So, I mean, again, he's unique. He is the only Roman who ever conquered Scotland. And I think probably the only man who ever conquered Scotland. I don't think England can really claim that.
Even Edward I didn't manage that.
So yeah, I think he's of immense importance to Britain, and I think he's a fascinating character.
And he seems to have been involved in the campaigns where a lot of hard graft was required, the tough ones. Yeah,
again, I think Tacitus, he may have been playing up for his audience in the fact that he's, you know, early on in what's the first book I've released, Agricola Invader, when he's off tramping around Wales with the legions. We're told that he climbs hills with the legions and, you know, marches in the swampy nastiness of North Wales, and he's there with the men. He's you know, doing a Julius Caesar basically, or later the Emperor Julian. Most generals, senior officers sit on a horse at the back on a mound and point, and people blow horns, and then legions move. And it's a very rare officer who gets out there and actually gets involved, because of course it's incredibly dangerous, particularly for an officer. The first thing, you know, you're a British tribesman, their method of fighting is largely to seek out somebody who is important and powerful to test yourself against in some sort of duel in the middle of the war, in the middle of the battle, to prove your manhood, your power, your might. So, you know, Agricola, with his, you know, shiny breastplate and bright plume and everything, wandering into the front, is making himself an instant target for anyone who wants to prove themselves. Which is why the centurions, who are marked out by their transverse crests, have huge death rates in every war. You know, the centurions die in droves because they're easily marked out and easy to find. So yeah, he's definitely a part of the army rather than being one of the you know, the stiff upper lip at the back types.
Yeah.
Yeah, leading by example rather than pushing them forward.
Or at least Tacitus has us believe that.
Yeah.
Actually, there was one question I wanted to ask you that I've been meaning to ask somebody forever. What's the difference between legionary forces and auxiliary?
Immense subject again. Actually, I've got a book on the Roman Auxilia coming out late this year as well. A non-fiction one. The simple form is the legions are the citizen soldiers. They are all Roman citizens. A legion is 5,500 men roughly, plus hangers-on, led by a legatus assigned by the Senate or the Emperor, and they are usually used as the shock troops. They're the heavy infantry, and often when control of a land is required, the legions are carefully positioned to control the whole area. There is evidence that legions actually controlled the auxilia as well. That the commander of a legion in an area, for instance, the 20th at Chester, had control also over the auxiliary forces in that region, which makes sense. I mean, every military throughout history that's been organized has been organized in a hierarchical state. The auxilia, on the other hand, were non-citizen troops. So these are German tribesmen from the border of the empire, horsemen from Asturias in northern Spain, you know, non-citizens who are acquired for their certain skills. Cretan archers, Balearic slingers, Spanish horsemen, Batavian horsemen from Germany, because they're known, as appears in Agricola, they're known for their ability to swim in armour alongside their horses. So they're incredibly useful in taking places across rivers. These auxiliary forces, they're part of the goal for the reason anyone would join them is because On the conclusion of your service, you receive citizenship, and then your son, of course, can join the legions, and of course you get all the Latin rights, all the legal and political rights of a Roman citizen. Then, so there's a lot of incentive. But yeah, the auxiliary forces the legions are all very much the same. They're all heavy infantry with a small cavalry contingent. The auxiliary are all very different. They play to their regional strengths, and they are used in all sorts of different ways.
Thank you.
In Invader, there's a great dynamic between Agricola and his slave, Lucy. That must have been a fun relationship to develop.
Yeah, and I'm currently writing book 2, so it's developing even further now.
Yeah.
And Lucy is obviously a fictional character, but I think you need, if you're going to explore a person's thought processes in this sort of environment, it's very handy to have somebody there as a foil to them, somebody that they can discuss matters with, that they can bounce ideas off, because that's the way you can get that thought process out to the reader.
Yeah.
Without just having to have Agricola thought this all the time. Lucy is an interesting character. When I do the editing, the first line of editing of everything, and I do it audio editing using Word, it always calls him Lucy, which throws me. Because Lucy is obviously, I think it comes from a tombstone, I think, or a carving on something from among the Siluris of South Wales, which is why I picked it, although it probably is just a short form of Lucius.
Well, I've been calling him Lucy all the time in my head.
He's moving in the direction of Lucius, obviously, because he's gradually becoming more Romanized as he spends time with Agricola.
But I love the way he forgets. It's not that he forgets he's a slave. It's just he couldn't care less that he's a slave. I think he still wants to speak his own mind.
Yeah, well, I think slavery in Rome is a fascinating subject in itself. There are so many different grades of slave, as it were. I mean, not officially grades, but it's a massive sliding scale between the ones who are dragged away to work in quarries or worked to death pushing plows in fields, or extremely powerful slaves in the imperial household who can command people themselves despite being slaves. Some of whom eventually buy their freedom and are immensely wealthy and powerful themselves. Prime example being the baker, Eurystheus the baker, whose tombstone stands outside the Porta Maggiore in Rome and is enormous, and tells of his string of bakeries across Rome that he owned, an ex-slave himself. So it's a huge sliding scale, and yes, Lucy is more outspoken and less slavish than you would expect a Roman slave to be, but that's only because of the specific circumstances he's in and an amount of leeway given him. Yeah, I tend to avoid writing too much the lives of slaves if I can, because there's only so many beatings and rapes you ever want to cover in a book.
Yeah.
What I liked about it was the discussion that he has with Agricola about his freedom. And it's like, yeah, I do want my freedom, but not in Britain, because I've been with the legions and it won't do me any good for you to release me here. So it's like, he wants his freedom, but he wants to choose when he gets it.
Well, for any household slave, I mean, I'm not talking about those, as I say, the poor sods working in fields and quarries and stuff like that, and mines. But for the majority of household slaves, even, with beatings and things, it's still probably nicer to be a household slave if you're looked after than to be a free man starving on the streets of Rome. Unless you're skilled and you have a leg up, it's very easy to be vagrant and starving in Rome.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there are many circumstances in which it'd be much nicer to be a slave than to be free. But again, it depends who your owner is and how you treat it.
Yeah. And you've made Agricola a very nice owner. And he does mention how some owners are not nice. And I think there's one bit he said, some of them kill their slaves. And I'm not sure why they do that, because that's just killing their own money.
Quite. But I mean, some people just clearly didn't care. I mean, some people, more money than sense, obviously, but and it's the same thing with gladiators. Everyone, pictures a gladiator fight. They picture two men entering the arena and one man leaving, victorious, the other being dragged out with hooks, leaving blood on the sand. The truth of it is 90% or more of gladiator fights were just two men dancing around each other, battering each other senseless until the crowd go woo, and then bowing and walking off with a couple of cuts and bruises, because it's an enormous outlay, a gladiator. They cost a lot of money to buy and to train up, and really just to send them out on the sand to die is an incredible waste of money. No gladiator trainer wants to lose their stock that way. So slaves are the same, I suppose. If a slave is valuable, you don't want to give them a slap, tell them, nope, not that, but don't beat them so hard that they can't do the work anymore.
So you've written about countless Romans, I suppose, in all your books, with the Marius Mules books, the Damned Emperors, the Gods of War that you wrote with Gordon Doherty. Who's your favourite Roman to write about?
It changes depending on what I'm writing, I suppose. I do enjoy writing about Agricola because of the history and the detail of it. At the moment, I'm back to writing my Praetorian books, and I thoroughly enjoy writing Rufinus in those, because I'm getting to put an element of humour in there, and I like a little bit of humour in the book, and it's now expected in Praetorian. And of course, there's his dogs as well that everyone loves. I suppose going back to book 7 of that, it's like putting on a pair of slippers. It's really comfy. I know the character, I know the circumstances and the era, and it's nice and easy and fun. Some books are a struggle, but really, I like any character I like underdogs. I love to write about underdogs, and I like any character that has something different about them that makes them stand out. And I think Rufinus is a prime example of that. Although he's now, I realised this. When I started Rufinus, Marius's Mules, the character in it was already a grizzled officer in the Roman military, in his 40s, stomping around complaining about his knees, which is essentially it was me to some extent. All his ailments were my ailments, and so on. And I started writing the Praetorian series. Rufinus was, in his early 20s. He was a young, go-getting soldier and everything. And I'm 7 books in, and he's now the age Fronto was when I was starting writing the Marius's Mules books. So now he's wandering around complaining about his knees and feeling old. So I suppose it's a natural progression as I get older. I'll be Tiberius, age 70 soon.
Yeah, Sharon mentioned you've written some books with Gordon Doherty, and that must have been a very different experience from just writing on your own. Can you tell us did you change a lot in how you worked, or did you learn things?
Yes, and yes. Again, I won't go into how the idea came about, because I've said that in various articles before. But essentially, Gordon and I wrote the story of Constantine and Maxentius, the two vying emperors in the end of the 3rd, start of the 4th century. Gordon was happy to take the role of Constantine because he wanted to re-examine Constantine, who is, he's a saint. He's renowned as the first Christian emperor, arguable as that might be. But he wanted to examine Constantine more as a Roman than as a Christian, I believe, and he's put sort of more depth into Constantine in the whole book, which suited me fine, because that left me with Maxentius, and Maxentius is the underdog, and I think I've already mentioned that. And I've been writing the Damned Emperors books, picking out emperors who suffered damnatio memoriae and trying to portray them more as humans than as monsters. And Maxentius is another one of those. He's another damned emperor. He's another emperor who, upon his fall, all his statues are re-chiseled to look like Constantine. All his monuments are dedicated by Constantine, and he's effectively removed from Roman history. So I loved Maxentius. I still love Maxentius. He's one of my absolute favourite emperors. And there's a great reenactor guy over in Rome who portrays him, who I've become quite good friends with. But the actual writing of it was fascinating, partially for the exploration we managed of that era of the civil wars and the Tetrarchy, which is a very, very unusual political situation, and deserving of plenty of books in its own right. So yeah, we studying all these aspects of the era and the people was great, but equally learning more about the art itself and the art of writing with Gordon. We have very similar writing styles, as has been commented by people who've read the books.
Yeah, it took me a little while to work out who was writing who. Yeah. I wasn't sure until.
So yeah, I'm aware. I've read some of Gordon's books, and he's read some of mine, and I think we're aware that we have a similar style. We've known each other for donkey's years anyway. We knew each other online long before we ever met and started mooting this idea.
But I think the similar style worked well because there wasn't a grinding, noticeable difference. It flowed better.
Yeah, I think it helps that we edited each other's work as well in it. We worked out the plan, we discussed the characters, we worked it all out, and then we started, working it chapter by chapter. And the fact is, I write a chapter and then send it to Gordon. He would then edit that chapter, send back his comments. I would amend and finish it up and then send it back to him. He would add the next chapter, send it to me. I would edit, send him my comments and so on. And it built up as a process, which meant that every chapter should flow from the previous chapter because we've just read it and edited on it before we start our own work.
Yeah. I wondered how you'd done that because I just had this image first of you writing alternate chapters and then looking at it at the end. But yeah, writing one chapter at a time and each of you looking through it.
Well, the beauty of it is, since it was a side project, it was never, because we couldn't afford to take time out on what was a major punt to see whether it worked. So it was a side project, and the way we did it worked because it meant we could write our own stuff, and then when we had spare time, I could go, right, I'm going to get to my chapter, finish it, send it to Gordon, and then a couple of weeks later he would get time, he would do his chapter and send it back to me, and so on. So it did work, and as well as learning about writing, learning about the editing process a great deal more. Also, I picked up a number of habits from Gordon. I said this the other day when I was interviewed. It fascinates me the level of detail Gordon goes into, because I'm quite OCD about my work. I have everything sort of carefully planned out beforehand, and I thought I'd beat nearly everyone. I have my chapter planned down to sort of individual scene level with characters and things like that before I even start looking at writing it. And I thought, I'm really organised. And then I looked at Gordon. I thought Gordon has these files that have, eye colour of characters who only put in one brief appearance and things. The attention to detail is stunning. So yeah, now I think I pay more attention to the detail than I ever did before I started working with Gordon, which is good because otherwise you get to this. I don't know because you've written plenty of stuff. I know non-fiction for you, Sharon, but particularly for you, Derek, you must have got to points with writing some book where you've thought, I wonder what colour his eyes are. I've probably put that in, 15 chapters ago, and you have to go back and think, oh, great, okay, right, that's fine. Okay, now I'll move on.
I had a spreadsheet because there were so many characters, and I thought I'm going to do something silly if I'm not careful. Because there's often, as you know, there's long gaps between writing a book in the series, perhaps, and you can't remember everything. It's just impossible. So absolutely. Yeah, that's what I do. Is I have a spreadsheet with all the characters' details in.
And with Derek, it's also all the characters' wounds.
Manner of death.
I did that. I think I did that. Yeah, in the Agricola I just wrote. He suffers an injury in combat, and then half a book later I thought, do I never even mentioned that again. He should be riding along going, ow, my leg every now and then. Yeah. So you occasionally, you have to go back and amend things when you realise I haven't done that.
Readers pick up on those things.
Yeah, but you have to remember, it's only 18, 19. They brush it off at that age.
The best one I ever did was to kill a character off twice. That was a crack. He was only a minor character. He was only a bit parter, but 3 books apart, I killed him off twice. And a beta reader went, you can't do that. They're like, oh yes, okay. Amend that.
So he was definitely dead then.
I suppose in TV series they do that quite often. They bring people back and then kill them off again.
Yeah.
So is there any period of Roman history that you haven't covered yet but would like to?
Loads. Actually, as time goes on, I'm getting more and more interested in late Rome. Again, that's probably Gordon's influence, because he is definitely a late Roman Byzantine historian. But I think I cut my teeth on the late Republican era. But I think the longer the further you go in Rome towards the Byzantine era, the more complicated, the more depth there is to it.
Well, I discovered that in the Constantine and Maxentius. Like you said, the Tetrarchy, they've got 2 emperors and 2 Caesars.
And when you move into Byzantine era, it gets even more complicated, because then you've got you've got Vikings serving as the bodyguard for a Roman emperor who speaks Greek, who dresses like a Persian. And you say, what's going on? But yes, there are eras I want to write about. There are people I want to write about. The Emperor Julian is a prime example. 360 odd. He was a cousin of Constantine's children, and he followed on from Constantine's sons after a civil war. And he was the emperor who briefly tried to return Rome to paganism after being Christian for half a century. And damn well near did it. And he was a good, solid Roman emperor, a powerful military man, a clever one, a learned one, actually surprisingly well liked, and unfortunately died of an injury after a battle, after only a brief reign. But yeah, Julian is a prime example. There's an emperor called Philip the Arab, Philippus Arabs, who is a fascinating character as well. There's all sorts of people I want to write about. I want to write about I did a short story once, but I want to really cover the political and trade envoys between China and the Roman court in the time of Marcus Aurelius and Antoninus, because that's, not recognized very much, throughout history. People don't realize that there was this link between East and West. And imagine Chinese emissaries handing over silk in the Roman court, and Roman merchants wandering around China. It's a fascinating subject, because of course then you've got the Silk Road, you've got all the through the Parthians and across the steppes with all the dangerous horse tribes and so on between Rome and China. The story has got to be a real fascinating adventure tale. Yeah.
Well, the scope is so huge, isn't it, for Rome? I mean, it's almost endless, isn't it?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, if you consider Rome as a complete entity from 753 BC, the traditional date of the founding of the city on the Palatine Hill, to the fall of Constantinople, because although they were based in the east and they spoke Greek, the Byzantines were still in their head Roman. They still believed they were the Roman Empire. And that ends in 1453 with the Turks taking the city. And even then it sort of drifts on for a short while in Absentia in Greece. But even then, that's over 2,000 years of Rome. I mean, there's been Rome was around longer than it's been gone, which is a really earth-shaking thought when you come to it. But over that time, it changed so much from essentially a very Greco-Etruscan state, still working with phalanx formations like the Greeks, through its growth and the formation of its citizen armies, the Punic Wars, the first acquisitions in Spain, the growth to take all of Italy, all this early Republican stuff. And then you've got the late Republic, Caesar's era, Caesar and Sulla and Crassus and Pompey, and all the civil wars and the growth of the standing army under Augustus then. The formation of the empire, everything, the Principate, where everything becomes a lot more ordered, I think, but also where it starts to become limited, sort of started to form borders and stopped expanding. But yeah, I mean, then you've got the era of Hadrian onwards, where you get solidified borders and border garrisons. Then you start to get the later Rome, where you get political troubles, emperors coming and going, emperors formed from the legions, then Goths serving in the army, the emperors sort of forming the Tetrarchy, Christianity coming in. Then you've got the fall of the Western Empire, and all the Alans and all the tribes moving into the west, and the formation more or less of a separate empire in the east. Then all the era with, you know, Attila, and you've still got a powerful empire there. And then gradually the contraction, the fall, and the war against the Turks. Over 2,000 years, that is the most fertile ground you could ever hope for a writer, because every 20 years there's something different to write about over 2,000.
Yeah, it's amazing, really. It's no surprise you haven't covered it all.
Well, and the other thing is, well, you know, if anybody looks at A Slice of Medieval and go, why are they talking about Romans? Because Romans bled into the medieval era.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
I mean, by the time Constantinople fell, we were already having the Wars of the Roses.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
It's more or less the end of medieval era that Rome finally fell.
Yeah, well, I did a talk down in Northampton about Vikings, and one of the subjects that we covered in conversation which is fascinating, is the bleed between historical eras, because people look at the Vikings, and in the public consciousness, the Vikings are a very different people to the Romans, totally opposed in a lot of ways, and yet realistically the sort of progenitors of the Vikings, the Germanic tribes and the South Scandinavian tribes, are related to, you know, the Germanic peoples on the border of the empire who are serving in the Roman auxiliary in northern Britain and things. The gods that they worship are very, very much the same as the Germanic gods. And in late Rome, say, you know, the last 10 years or so of Roman control in the north, say 400 AD, something like that. You look at a Roman legionary in 400 AD, such as he is, and he's wearing a shirt, enclosed boots, trousers, a chain shirt, carrying a spear, and with a big round shield. And what is a Saxon or a Viking doing? They're wearing a chain shirt, carrying a big round shield and a spear or a sword, wearing trousers and leather boots. You can't really, there's not a great deal of difference. And even the art and the decor that they're carrying on their belts, and, you know, horse mounts and stuff, they're all very similar. The bleed between the two cultures is immense. And the same happens in the East with the Byzantines and the Persians and the Goths and the Scythians. So, and even Africa as well. You know, Africa and Rome. Rome had monochrome mosaics. It was all black and white, or black and white and red mosaics. And then, you know, it was Africa where the beautiful multichrome mosaics come from. These wonderful images, these great artworks, and that spreads across the empire. That's an African thing, really, that starts to fill Rome. So yeah, there's a bleed between cultures, but that means there's also a bleed between eras. And I think Rome was influenced by what would become the Vikings, what would become the Parthians and Persians, the Huns, and vice versa. They carried Rome, you know, far away into the heart of their own peoples.
Yeah, I mean, I think in many people's heads, there's topics, aren't there, which are separate from other topics. Whereas the reality of life at any particular period is that there are influences from all over the place, and some of them quite strong.
Absolutely.
So it's not surprising there was sort of a bleed from one culture to another, because they're side by side in most cases. It's fascinating.
Yeah, we look at Britain, and this is one that I love. The fact that you know, if you study in school, if you look at school subjects, it's Roman Britain, or it's Saxon Britain, or it's Viking Britain, or it's Norman Britain. And hang on, the people who are serving in the north in Rome, a lot of them are Batavians or Tungrians, who are tribesmen from northern Belgium, the Rhine, Holland, who worship this guy called Wotan, among other things. And then you've got the Saxons, but hang on, they're from the north of Holland, from the Rhine Delta, and they worship this guy called Wotan. And then you get the Vikings coming across, but hang on, they're, you know, from Denmark and places. You know, you've got the Danes and the various other tribes, and they're worshiping this guy called Woden, and he's you know, they're a different people. Odin coming in from Scandinavia, but you know, they're all They're very
Yeah.
similar peoples. And then you get the Normans, and admittedly they're nicely Christianized when they come over, but they're just the Vikings a few generations removed.
Yeah.
Anyway. So all these people that are coming over that we consider different peoples are really just one long sort of progression of the same cultures. So,
yeah,
which is why I don't think it's jarring it was jarring to the people who were here, I don't think.
No, that's right. I mean, when you think about the Saxons coming into Britain, the people they weren't sort of coming across Roman legionaries. They were coming across people who lived in post-Roman Britain, who were descended from all manner of people. Very few of them necessarily Roman,
including other Saxons.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. No, it is fascinating. Right, okay. We asked this question a fair bit, with varying success, I must add. Who would you imagine playing Agricola or Lukey in a TV series or a film?
I've thought long and hard on this one, and the upshot is I don't know. The reason being, I can picture fictional characters. You know, when I wrote Maris's Mules, in my head he was Gary Oldman. I can do this. Tim Roth has been characters that I've written. You know,
yeah, I know. Yeah,
fictional characters. I can do that. Because I need to kind of assign them an image in my head if I'm going to write them anyway. But with real characters, I think I daren't picture Agricola as anyone other than just the character built by Tacitus in his work, because otherwise I think I'm being unduly influenced to some extent. I suppose Lukey is a fictional character. I don't know, somebody irreverent, and Tim Roth again would be a good choice, I think, but maybe a slightly younger Tim Roth.
A younger Tim Roth, yeah.
He's a bit older than Agricola, isn't he, Lucy?
Yeah.
So, but Agricola is only 18 when we meet him at first, so I'm guessing he'd be, you know, an up-and-coming actor who gets his first break.
Yes, and being an old fuddy-duddy myself, most of the actors I know now are aging anyway.
Well, I mean, that's often been the case for me, and I'm thinking of people who are about 60 years old, and I'm thinking of Sean Bean and people like that.
Yeah.
But I must admit, of late, I have tried to re-educate myself with actors a little bit, so that when my children say, "Oh, well, have you seen Timothy Chalamet in a film?" And I actually know who they're talking about, which didn't used to be the case.
Good for you, because I don't. Yeah.
My problem with Timothy Chalamet, he's the one who played Henry V, isn't he, in The King? And he was just too skinny to be somebody playing Henry V. I thought that he's not somebody who's trained to be a knight since he was 5 years old.
The last person I remember playing Henry V is Kenneth Branagh, so that probably dates me.
Absolutely. Well, he was Henry V, wasn't he?
Or Laurence Olivier.
At least you didn't say Olivier.
Yes.
I still, in my head, I belong to the era of people like Sir John Gielgud and Michael Hordern, I think.
Yeah.
To me, Gandalf will always be Michael Hordern.
Yeah. It's what you grow up with, though, isn't it? Makes a big impact.
I think it is.
Yeah, I think it's the formative years. It's what you see then, which, you know, means my children are growing up seeing all the Marvel superhero characters. They're going to be their great actors of the future.
The future is lost. Except for Robert Downey Jr. I remember him when I was a kid, and he's still doing it.
Downey Jr. is an exception, definitely.
Yeah.
Because he harkens back to the older sort of era now, anyway. I think.
Yeah.
Right, so what's next, Simon?
Oh, there's always a dozen pots on the boil. I've just finished the second Agricola book. I mean, literally sent it off to the editor yesterday, so that's up and running. That was originally a trilogy, but now it's going to be a four book series, a quadrilogy, a tetrailogy. I discussed this with Matt Harvey and Stephen Mackay, and I can't for the life of me remember what the answer was. But it's a 4-book series anyway. a trilogy in 4 parts, as Douglas Adams would have it. I'm back to writing Praetorian. The 7th one of those, finally after about a 2-year hiatus, is coming out this spring, which is just, as I think I said earlier, great fun. It's like putting on a pair of slippers writing Rufinus. I have a book coming out late this year that's, I don't know whether I'm supposed to announce it or not, because it's not even got a cover yet officially, but it's a standalone first century Roman one through Head of Zeus. The Vikings are back with in August, I think, through Canello, with the 5th Viking book, which is set in the north of England, in my home territory, stomping around Swaledale in the 1040s. So again, medieval, because that's...
How do you do it? Because I've got 2 books coming out this year, and you've got how many books coming out this year?
Oh, Simon's the man. I mean, he's written so many books.
And I say I've got the non-fiction auxiliary book coming out late this year as well. So, but hey, you've got to keep going. Keeps the brain fresh.
Keeps you out of trouble.
Yeah. The ideas keep coming. That's the trouble.
Yes.
Can't stop them, really.
Yes, there are always more ideas than there is time to write them.
Yeah.
I have a folder full of stories that are only half a chapter in or a chapter in. I just thought, that's a great idea, but not had time to get any further with. And I've got several sort of side projects that are planned with other people that I've just not had time to get to either.
Yeah.
There was one other question I wanted to ask you that I thought of yesterday. You have the 9th Legion in your book, and we all know about the Rosemary Sutcliffe, the Eagle of the 9th. So what do you think happened to the 9th Legion?
Okay, I wonder whether Simon Elliott's going to listen to this, because he and I have this conversation every time we meet, I think, because he did a book on the Rome's missing legion, the 9th Legion.
Yeah, I have read Simon's book.
And he is, as he says, there is no definite answer to what happened to the 9th Legion. Some people will have you believe that they were destroyed in Scotland, in the Agricolan campaigns, or at least were so depleted as a legion during that campaign that, essentially they were disbanded and the troops were folded into other legions, and that any evidence that appears following that is just reused roof tiles and things like that from sites where the 9th were based. For me, there's enough evidence coming out of Nijmegen in Holland from the Trajanic Hadrianic era that the 9th Legion, I think, were moved. When Hadrian came over here, he reshuffled the military all around the empire, and he rebuilt the Roman military in Britain around the time of Hadrian's Wall, and he moved 1 legion in, 1 legion out, and I think the 9th Legion went to Nijmegen then. The last evidence we have of them as a legion is in Nijmegen. They don't appear on the roster of legions under Marcus Aurelius, so they are gone by the 150s, 160s, certainly. But I think, for me, there's a good chance that they were one of the legions involved in the Jewish Bar Kokhba revolt under Hadrian, and that they were destroyed there. There are legions that are mentioned in the writings over there that are not identified by number. And it's highly likely for me that the 9th were one of those legions transferred over to bolster troops, and either destroyed in formation or depleted so much they were used to bolster other legions. But I don't think they were ever just defeated in Britain and the fallen eagle lying in the mud in the mist of northern Britain. It's a lovely story. Thank you, Rosemary Sutcliffe. But I don't believe it.
I think it's a great story. It gets people interested in history, in Roman history. My son was fascinated by it when he first read it.
In fairness, the 9th Legion were not the luckiest legion. They did take a battering repeatedly. I mean, they were the ones that, in Agricola, they were, in the first Agricola book, they were the ones that Petilius Cerialis commanded, split between 2 camps over in the Midlands. And he takes enough what he thinks are enough troops to put down a minor British tribe, and then walks into a trap and gets absolutely marmalised by the Iceni in the east, and limps away with some cavalry to hide behind his walls and wait for it to be over. Because Cerialis, he's a character. I've just written about him again in this one. He's a character who always charges in without thinking too hard about what he's doing. And when he's successful, by God, he's successful. He's a really fantastic hero in that respect. And in book 3 of Agricola, he's going to come into his own again. And he is the man who put down the Batavian revolt in AD 70. Very, very clever man when he gets it right. When he gets it wrong, by God, he gets it wrong. And the Ninth Legion, so they took a real battering by Boudica under him. And then again, they are the legion who are attacked by the Caledonii in the Highlands. Possibly, I can't remember the location I decided they were based at, but it's just inside the Highlands, not far from the Roman lines of the Gascoigne and that sort of area. But yeah, again, they're battered and beaten there. We're told that the Caledonii are actually in the camp, killing Romans willy-nilly when Agricola turns up with his legions to save them. So yeah, the Ninth Legion again getting beaten. I think they have this reputation. They fall into that charge of the Light Brigade kind of sort of story.
Nobody wants to be assigned to that legion. Oh dear. Thank you very much, Simon. That has been absolutely fascinating, and I don't think I've laughed so much in ages. My pleasure. No, yeah, very much my pleasure.
Very good to talk to you again.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it.
Nice to see you both again.
Yeah, you too. It's been a while.
The passage of time. I'm getting older and older and older and older.
Yeah.
My characters are getting older and older.
Yeah.
We're all creaky.
Yeah. So thank you very much for joining us, Simon. It's always fabulous talking with you. It's great fun. We'll have to do one with you and Gordon one day. That should be a laugh.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Raucous, I suspect.
So huge thanks to Simon James Atkinson Turney. If you have the chance, do read Agricola Invader. It's well worth it. Join us next time when it will be Derek and myself investigating the relationship between Henry IV and Richard II. I'm guessing they don't end on friendly terms, but we'll see. I've been Sharon Bennett Connolly.
And I'm Derek Birks. Thanks for listening, and do subscribe to avoid missing a podcast. If you enjoyed it, perhaps you might give us a like, and if you have time, we'd love to have a rating or a review from you. So join us next time.